So, folks, last time we ended by our lessons about Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny by talking about lesson 8, which is stand out. It's maybe a bit counterintuitive, but it plays into obeying in advance. Don't be afraid to stand out. Standing out can actually be a very useful tool to combat fascism, to combat tyranny and authoritarianism. And that is, in effect, by standing out, you are both, whether it's fashion, whether it's opinions, whether it is, building your platform, whether it is, speaking up at the Thanksgiving table, standing out is important because it resists the encroachment of power in that way. And so now we are going to be moving on to lesson 9, be kind to our language. Now, I've been looking at Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, the book, because I actually went out and bought it, and it's very good. I would recommend, even if you're getting a lot out of, us going over the lessons from On Tyranny, I would recommend getting it yourself because the book is a bit different from his lessons and communicates with maybe a bit more nuance than he does speaking-wise. But I think you can get different things out of both, so maybe do both. The lessons on YouTube are free. Go do that. Lady Raincloud, you're talking with your former candidate, now turned Dem Club president, about taking on the comms director chair job tomorrow. Well, best of luck. Let's go, because now is not the time to be standing down. We talked about that at length yesterday. So let's jump into lesson 9 here. Let's get through as many of these as we can, because we only made it through 8 last time.
This is Timothy Snyder. I am reciting here again in the summer of 2021 the lessons of On Tyranny, reading each one of them in a separate video
It's
clip.
okay, Charlie. We all understand.
About the present and the future. I have a little bit of distance now on the moment when I wrote the lessons. It's been almost half a decade since I did so.
Yeah, keep in mind, he wrote these lessons in 2017, and I think he updated it in 2021 or 2022, I think, when these were posted. Out of curiosity, 3 years ago, so 2021.
We have 4 years of the Trump administration between now and when I wrote the lessons. A lot of the things that I worried about have been borne out. A lot of the things that I wrote in the lessons have been helpful to people, and I'm gratified that people have written me to say so. We've reached lesson 9, and lesson 9 is be kind to our language. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to say something about how the reaction to the book is relevant to this lesson, and then I'm going to move into how we can continue to be kind to our language in the years to come. So be kind to our language. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey the thing you think everyone is saying. Make an effort to separate yourself from the internet. Read books. So from my own little selfish corner of our media space, I notice something every day, which is that I can really tell the difference between people who write me because of something they've been triggered by on the internet and people who write me because they've read a book, my book, or someone else's book. The mode, the mood, the time taken, everything is different. Like, I don't even have to think about it. People don't say, I was triggered by this on the internet, but you can tell right away. You can tell because they use the same words that all the other people triggered by that same thing on the internet were using. And sadly, it's very often the very words that they were triggered by, which they are simply repeating. And this is a prospect which frankly terrifies me, right? It's not that I mind being criticized or, that's not the point. The point is that when we as a species, right, when we as humans are narrowed down to repeaters of memes, which have found us because of algorithms on the internet, we are in deep trouble, right?
Yeah, and I mean, to kind of build off of this a little bit is, if you're just repeating memes, but you don't understand the fundamental mechanics of what you're trying to talk about and what you're trying to convey, then you wind up having a hollow position and you wind up just mimicking, and like frankly, just mimicking correct opinions is not enough. It's not going to protect you when those opinions get challenged, Um a really great example for me was, growing up, I grew up in like this very conservative Christian household, and I wound up, at I think, I might have been like 18, 19 years old. And that was the first time in my life somebody had asked me, "Well, why do you think this is true?" And I didn't have an answer. Like outside of this book that you've been given to like, you know, repeat it as true, why do you think that that book is true? And I just had never been asked that question before, and it caused a lot of consternation because I had simply been mimicking the apologetics that had been given to me without actually questioning or understanding the fundamentals. Um, and in part that was, I think, by design, but we're not getting into a conversation about religion here. We're talking about like that applies even to like political mechanisms. That applies to a lot of different topics, right? And so one of the things we need to do is we need to seek that understanding so that we can articulate it to other people in a way that goes beyond simply memes. You need to understand it in order to properly talk about it and defend that position. Hey, Salmon Moose.
If we become, if the definition of who we are becomes repeaters of algorithmically targeted memes, that's not just a bad way to live. It's not a possible way to support anything like a democracy, because
well, also, yeah, if you're just repeating the meme, it cheapens the language. It weakens your position, and at the end of the day, like democracy needs a level of understanding, a level of mutual understanding built between people, not just shared memes.
democracy depends upon us having some sense of time beyond our immediate outrage. It involves us having some way of expressing.
Maybe a better way of putting this is that if your political ideology is based entirely on memes, you're a reactionary because you do not have a foundation on which your political ideas are based on.
Ourselves, besides the words that travel through us from the internet and towards other people. Now, I don't want to idealize books.
Just going with the wind.
Certainly not my books, but it is.
His books are pretty good, though. You should check them out.
Clearly the case that when people are at the end of reading a book, they have in some way been changed, in some way been enriched, something has been added to them. I tend to think about this in terms of unpredictability, right? Whereas time on the internet sorts you out, wears off your rough patches, makes you more like other people in the little group you've been categorized in. Reading makes you less predictable. Reading takes what you have, it adds something to it in an unpredictable way. You don't know what you would write to someone.
Well, yeah, and Charlie, that's why conservative ideology discourages that kind of introspection. I'll just read your comment. Funnily enough, asking myself why I think things and even what do I actually think of something is kind of how I traveled left because it needs more reading and investigation. Exactly. Questioning and finding your foundation is a really, really important thing because it provides you like grounding, and that grounding and inquisitiveness tend to lead people to the left, generally speaking.
After you've read a book, you can't anticipate it, right? Whereas I can anticipate what you're going to write after you see something on the internet. And that unpredictability is really essential. And that question so the question becomes, how do you become unpredictable? And the answer is simple, right? The internet is not only predictable, it predictifies. I think I made that word up. If I didn't, someone will correct me. The internet predictifies. It makes you more predictable. Whereas
Quasi-spec, thanks for the sub.
Simple solution, right? I'm in a library. If I turn around and I look at a shelf of books, I'm going to find one that I haven't read. And if I read it, it's going to add something unpredictably to me. But the library shelf itself, just looking at a library shelf and picking something out, is a way of realizing how much richness and variety and unpredictability there is in the world. The internet just doesn't do that for us. And it doesn't do that, and this is the point of this lesson, it doesn't do that for our language. The internet, in a way which strikingly reminds me of George Orwell's 1984, the internet basically has made automatic the process which Orwell talked about in 1984. In 1984, people in the novel, people are working to make the language ever smaller, but it's a human effort, right? And as usual, reality has done science fiction one better. In our reality, it's the social media which are narrowing down the words that you hear, or rather read, if reading's the words to which you're exposed, to the ones that are most likely to trigger you, most likely to make you outraged. Or
this is true to an extent, right? Like I think that I do think that there is a bit of, you know, boomer fear mongering about cheapening of the language, and I'm unsure to the degree language has always kind of worked that way, where like, you know, language might cheapen, but we build our own words, we build our own phrases, we build our own you know, signifiers. We build those as needed. Like language is a tool, and as such we augment it constantly. You know, that's how we get words like brain rot uh, into the general lexicon, right? Like people are mixing and matching different parts of words all the time. So I'm not entirely sure if I agree with him in the sense that it is cheapening language to kind of direct it a la 1984. But I will say that I agree with him in the sense that social media platforms farm engagement, and, you know, bad actors on social media platforms farm engagement. And in order to farm engagement, they tend to use a certain subset of words, and that subset of words gets seen more and more, which, you know, I do understand what he's trying to go for here, and I think that there is a partial point here, but I'm not entirely sure to the degree I agree with it.
we're happy, right? Because it's that alternation of outrage and
Like Elon Musk is heavily incentivized to make every second on Twitter infuriating for you, and the algorithm is tuned to do that. Whether you're conservative or liberal, you know, that's what it's tuned to do. And that's why so many people find Blue Sky a breath of fresh air, because it's not actively trying to create an environment that is farming the most engagement out of you, maximizing your outrage.
and contentment, or or complacency, really. Outrage, complacency. It's that mixture of feelings which keeps your
Salmon Moose says, this is interesting as someone who has built online apps. A lot of what he's talking about is less about the internet and more about those who are managing it. People with money don't like unpredictability, and I frequently had to dial back stuff that shows weird stuff. I would be so curious to learn what you mean by weird stuff.
your eyes peeled
Hey,
on the
Build a
screen.
Dog.
So the internet narrows down to the words which are going to trigger you or make you feel like you're right. And so as the language is impoverished, your thought is impoverished as well. We don't only think in words, but the more words we have, the more unpredictable we are to ourselves, the more possible reactions we can have. So
how do I become curious if I'm not naturally curious? Well, sometimes curiosity takes effort. You know, in a sense, curiosity comes more naturally to some people than others, but it's also a skill. It's a skill you can nurture and develop as you go, you know, like, so if you're not naturally curious, you know, you might have to have more like regimented time in which you're like, okay, now's the time I have to, you know, inquire about some of my beliefs. And it might not be like the thing you're, you know, you might rather do something else, but it's important to question yourself.
be kind to our language means something very simple. It means spending less time on the internet. It means not being triggered by the internet. Like if you have to be on the internet, try not to be its agent, not spread its memes out to other human beings. If you're in touch with another human being, make sure that you've paused and cleansed and you say something human to that person rather than something which is flowing through you because of the algorithms you've just been exposed to. But
I think maybe a good way of rephrasing what he's saying here is, take a minute to breathe and realize that the way you talk to an actual flesh and blood human being in person or on the phone needs to be different than how you interact with people on like a Twitter or a Blue Sky. People are on the other end of those accounts some of the time. You need to actually engage with a real person as a real person. Because one of the most horrifyingly alienating things you can do is treat someone in real life the same way you treat someone online. Does that make sense?
But more fundamentally, this is why it's such an easy lesson. Just read books. Just read books. It makes us feel better. It prepares us for the difficult political realities around us in a way which, at least hopefully, doesn't feel like too much work. So we can all be kind to the language. That was lesson 9. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that overall, while I'm not 100% on board, I think Salmon Moose kind of nails it. It is less the internet inherently is that way, and more so that capital interest in the internet fosters that kind of online behavior that he's talking about. Sophie Bliss, thank you for the gifted tier 1 sub. And Christinos, no, we have not talked about South Korea. We're not going to do that this stream. We're going to do it next stream, which will be later tonight, because I only have a limited amount of time with you, and I figured we'd crank some of these out. Also, Sam Moose writes, the social app I worked on was art-based. Those with money only wanted to see things that were like other art, whereas the stuff that was always most popular was stuff that was new. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's the moneyed interest that like changes ultimately a lot of how people interact online. It's the same way. No, hoi polloi, we're going to be going for like another 45 minutes. But it's the same way that like there are people paid to manage the layouts of, superstores like Walmart or Target. They're paid to create those layouts to maximize, where people are going to spend their time, what they're going to see in what order, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so the internet is like that, but on a massive scale, on a much larger and faster, timeline. And so it does become kind of this thing where the internet is just doing everything that capitalists do in stores, but to your entire online ecosystem, for the most part. Obviously, you can find small websites that do not do that are not trying to maximize your time, but the big ones, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they are trying to do that nonstop. They're trying to keep you caught in their online ecosystem for as long as possible. TikTok, etc. Also, hey, Paladin lost. And yeah, Paladin, it is not 2 a.m., but we are going to be going late tonight. I'm going to be taking a break in about 45 minutes. And then we'll be starting later tonight again on a second stream. You guys get 2 streams today. Okay. Moving on. Lesson 10, believe in truth. Also, give me 1 second here. Okay, we're back. Also, please hit the follow button on Twitch, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, like the goddamn YouTube stream, and please consider dropping those sweet, sweet subs and donos because I need your support to make this stream possible. And let's keep going. We're on to lesson 10 of On Tyranny. Believe in truth.
Hello, I'm Timothy Snyder. It's summer of 2020-21. I'm very happy to have the occasion to return to On Tyranny. A lot of things have happened in the meantime since late 2016 when I first wrote the lessons. A lot of things have happened to all of us in the meantime. We've had, sadly, I think, the experience of seeing how these lessons, the lessons of the book On Tyranny, which I drew from what I knew from history, how unfortunately they do have applicability to us. I would be happy if they didn't, but frankly, it would be very strange if they didn't. There's only one history. The point of history is not to pull out this point and that point and compare one thing, compare A and B and say A is better. That's not the point. The point of history is that history is a reservoir of the possible. Everything which happened could happen. That's one thing we can say with 100% certainty about it. And so if we're able to look straight at things that have happened, or maybe even more important,
hey, Salmon Moose, thanks for subscribing to Prime. Let's go.
People who passed through crises that are still greater than ours, we can learn something which might be relevant. That was the method of On Tyranny. I was drawing from my own knowledge of history. Even more than that, I was drawing from the witnesses. I was taking from people who had passed through fascism and communism. So my point of On Tyranny was not really to make comparisons. My point was to be humble and to learn. And I think that was a worthwhile endeavor. So in these little videos, I'm returning to each lesson, I'm reading it, and then I want to give a few reflections about the last few years and about what I think might be to come. The happy occasion for doing this is that these lessons are going to reappear with a slightly updated text in a graphic version of the book, a beautiful illustrated version.
I should have gotten that version.
By me and
got
Nora
the
Krug,
text-only version
in October of 2021. So this video is about lesson 10, which is believe in truth. Believe in truth. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power because there is no basis upon which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. The biggest wallet pays for the most blinding lights. One of the things I liked about this lesson was that it was both classical and postmodern at the same time. This problem of truth and spectacle was one of the arguments that Greek philosophers.
By the way, a lot of people wonder constantly about Donald Trump's alternate facts, and they wonder about Silicon Valley embracing kind of this post-factual world. Like, how can they believe in, lies constantly and, dispute like scientific findings constantly when like their entire careers rely upon scientific discovery and advancement? And honestly, the answer lies in the fact that it is harder to, oppose them. It's harder to oppose their power if truth is obliterated. If no one can ascertain what the truth is, then their power only grows.
Made skeptically about democracy, that this is simply what would always happen. Wealth would be unequal. The people who had lots of wealth would create spectacle. They would make voting meaningless. But it also corresponded to the postmodern. In Russia and in plenty of other countries as well, we see an extreme case where you have this political philosophy of total nihilism. Nothing is true. And once nothing is true, then political power becomes entertainment power, or vice versa. The ability to entertain then becomes political power. If nothing is true, then whoever draws our attention is the one who has power. And if nothing is true, we don't really have any way to resist because
and a good thing to point out here is that money can buy attention. Capital can purchase attention. Capital can't necessarily purchase truth.
we can't really create, or most of us can't create, counter spectacles. If we want to resist, we have to say, you have done X, Y, or Z. The world is A, B, or C. When we deny ourselves that ability by denying that anything is true, we just slip and slide along. There's no way that we can have any purchase on the world if we give up on the idea of truth. So that's one of the reasons I like this lesson. I mean, another reason why I like this lesson is that
it's true, banana brains. If nothing is true, everything is permitted is basically like the summary of this entire lesson so far.
It's turned out, I mean, I wish it hadn't, but it's turned out to be so relevant to the events of the last 5 years. One of the things which has come out in the last 5 years, or one of the things which has happened, has been this debate about free speech. And I just want to mention, in connection with this believe in truth business, that believing in truth has to do with asserting a value, that some things are actually true. I mean, we may never get to truth, but there's a horizon of truth, and that we should be pursuing it, and that hunt is valuable. That hunt for truth is virtuous. I'm saying this because in the origins of the argument for freedom of speech, this hunt is essential. This difficult hunt for truth is essential. And truth is elusive, but it's also hidden from us, right, by power. So
yeah, this is something that I think a lot of people might be missing out in their lives, and it kind of gets back to what Screech123 was asking in YouTube chat earlier. What to do if you're not naturally curious, and it's understanding that the very foundation of our society relies upon inculcating this sense of virtue in searching for the truth. We might always be searching for it. It's not a quest that ever ends, but in the search we better ourselves, and in bettering ourselves and our understanding, we can communicate that better to other people and in aggregate improve society. But when that search for truth is stymied and quashed and killed, suddenly we are rudderless in a storm, and that storm is summoned by moneyed interests far greater than ourselves.
The strongest argument for free speech is that free speech is about speaking truth to power, right? Free speech is about exercising the double virtue of looking for the truth and saying it, right? Free speech. So sure, I mean, I will fight to the death to protect your right to repeat, the idiotic internet meme that you just learned last night. But that's not the point of free speech. And when you repeat the idiotic internet meme that you just learned last night, don't think that you are taking part in the great, transcendent history of free speech. You're not. The great transcendent history of free speech is about hunting hard for truth and speaking it to power, right? Which is why it's a perversion of those values, when what we have to do, as we have had to do under the Trump administration, is to listen to lies from power, right?
Yeah, and he's touching on something here, and I don't think he's saying it particularly well in a way that might resonate with people who watch my show. But to kind of rephrase what he's saying here, like, it's not enough to simply have correct opinions. It's not enough to simply know the truth. You have to communicate the truth. You have to act upon that truth. It is not enough to simply have the correct opinion. Like, it is not enough to just know what is correct.
If what free speech is about is speaking truth to power, then lies coming down from power, right? That's sure, they're protected by free speech. They're protected by the First Amendment, but they're the opposite of the virtue, which is at the heart of free speech. And in this administration, as I think it's fair to say, at no other time,
welcome to Minnesota,
with consistency, with frequency, by so many lies, continuous lying, which was correct.
How does one communicate the truth if one is never listened to? Then one also seeks not just the truth, but the means to communicate it effectively.
Corrosive, which did push Americans further in the direction of thinking that, well, nothing's really true, they're only opinions. And of course, if nothing's really true and they're only opinions, then we're disempowering ourselves. I've already
or if it's not communicating, interpersonally. It's building up an online platform or building up an IRL platform or showing up to the DSA meetings or showing up to the Democrat meetings or showing up to protests and communicating your truth in more direct fashions. Like communicating that truth takes many different forms. You have to find the one that works for you.
Said that, but we're also slowly preparing the way for what happened towards the end of the Trump administration, which is a big lie. Right? Big lies function where there isn't much resistance, where other truths have already gotten out of the way, where the belief in truth has gotten out of the way, and then and this comes from Hitler, whether we like it or not. This comes from Hitler. This opened the space to tell a lie which is so big that no one can doubt it. Hitler explains this logic in Mein Kampf. I'm sorry, that's just where it comes from. I mean, you may not like to have things juxtaposed this way, but there's only one history. Hitler in Mein Kampf explains that telling a big lie is successful because people won't believe that you would tell a lie that was that big, right? So for example, you lose a presidential election by, I don't know, let's say 7 million votes, and you say, nevertheless, that you won a historic landslide victory. That is a big lie, right? Because some people, a lot of people, are simply not going to believe that you could tell a lie.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, he is correct, right? Like, the reason he's bringing this up is because in Mein Kampf, Hitler talks extensively about his goals and his tactics. And it turns out, unfortunately, that his tactics wound up working in the case of Germany, right? And, in a lot of ways, this is not like Trump is exactly literally Hitler, right? But Trump is a fascist. Trump is aware of Hitler's tactics. And Trump also engages in the big lie type of misinformation. And it's not just about the election, though that is one of the most egregious, right? He tells numerous big lies all the time, to the point where his audience expects him to lie. They don't expect him to be telling the truth about literally anything he's talking about at any given time, and that works in his favor. And by telling a series of extraordinarily big lies, he is able to move what is possible for him to do in a way that is deeply, deeply destructive to every single person who lives in the United States. Didn't he have Hitler's speeches on his nightstand? Yes, according to his ex-wife.
Which was that big.
And also former lawyer, I believe.
Lies are big not just because they're distant from reality. Big lies have a social...
So his audience knows he lies? Yeah, of course. I mean, his audience will be like, well, it wasn't millions of undocumented immigrants, but it was definitely enough undocumented immigrants who voted. If you ask any Trump supporter, they'll tell you, oh yeah, he bends the truth. They'll admit readily that, like, oh yeah, that thing he said, it wasn't true, but he says a lot. He says a lot of stuff, and he can't hold to all of it. He's just like any other politician. They have been hooked by big lie tactics. Yeah, exactly. It allows them, almost like the Bible that many of them believe. It allows them to pick and choose what they believe is true from any given speech that he gives.
And political force. The thing about a big lie is that because it's not true and because it's big, if you commit yourself to it, that means you're committing yourself to belonging to the leader who told it and to the group who also believes it, right?
Yeah, because this is another really important part. It's sunk cost fallacy. If you believe or attach yourself to the person who is spreading the big lie constantly, you have invested a part of yourself, an important part of yourself, into that person being in power and being correct. And so a lot of Trump supporters might not initially start out by believing that millions of undocumented immigrants voted in the election and rigged it in favor of Joe Biden, but they'll still defend that point. They'll wind up defending it, and maybe in time coming to believe it genuinely. But it's a whole sunk cost fallacy thing. Yeah, I mean, they will come up with basically their own religious ideology to justify um, how they justify Trump, essentially. Um, Firecrafted Gaming in YouTube chat says, "My ma thinks there's a clone of Trump. One only does good, other only does all the bad stuff. I have to live with her." Like, people do this. They literally come up with religious justifications for his lies. This is why believing in truth in a time of authoritarianism and tyranny is a revolutionary act. This is why seeking it out and communicating that truth to others and to those in power is kind of an imperative thing to do.
You're committing yourself in effect to a conspiracy theory. It has to be a conspiracy theory because the lie which is told is against all kinds of evidence which is actually out there in the world.
Because the conspiracy singularity is becoming more and more potent and omnipresent in American society. That's by design.
And so therefore you must generate a conspiracy which is big enough and powerful enough to have produced all of this evidence which works against your belief. So a big lie has to lead to faith in a leader, right, who is the source of the lie, but it also has to lead...
And faith in the leader in an almost literal sense, too, like almost deifying the leader. And we see this all the time. They literally made like golden idols to Trump at CPAC last time. They literally talk about him like he's the second coming of Christ.
Lead to conspiracy theories. And it has to lead to a politics of us and them, because you're committed to this thing, right? You're committed to this story. And so therefore the people who are not committed to it, who don't accept this incredibly important thing that you believe, they must be the enemy. Not just your fellow citizens, but the enemy, right? And a big lie ultimately, and this is something which the communist dissidents argued in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the last century, a big lie ultimately has to lead to violence because you're not going to be able to defend it finally in any other way. And as I've said in some of these other little videos, we can't forget that that has already happened.
Yeah, like this is kind of the dark truth that we have waiting in our future, potentially, if this conspiracism is allowed to flourish, if Donald Trump truly does take us down the roads that he is currently threatening to take us down. It could get really dangerous. This is why we are very specifically in this community trying to build mutual aid networks so that you can get out of red states where the hammer is going to fall hardest. This is why we're trying to build up a kind of a collection of community skills that you can rely on when things get hard. This is why we're going to try and our best to like build up, mutual aid within this online community that can help you guys when shit really hits the fan, because it has the potential to get really bad.
The American big lie of Mr. Trump already led to violence and death and the risk of much more death and many other terrible things in January of 2021. The next thing I want to say about believing in truth, shifting now to the positive, is that if we're going to believe in truth, we have to believe in it on the basis of something, on the basis of institutions that we create. It's just not true, unfortunately, that the truth is out there, right? I mean, as people who are as old as I am will know what I'm referring to.
When in the future will we not have to deal with this? That's the best part, okay? Once you are politically aware enough to be engaging in this way, there is no off-ramp. I'm sorry. You've been suckered in. Now you have been made aware. You have seen the info hazard, you have heard the info hazard, and now it's too late to unlearn what you've learned. I guess you can black pill yourself and just go, homestead somewhere and hope that it just misses you. But if you are at all going to become or be a part of society, sorry, you've learned the workings of the world, and now you are doomed to toil to make them right.
It's not true that the truth is just out there. It's not true, as our whole tradition of Anglo-Saxon liberal thought from Milton to Mill. It's not true that if there's a marketplace of ideas and the good ideas win. Just not true, right? Simply not true.
And guess what? That true, salmon and trout, true. You may be locked in, but that doesn't mean we're hopeless. You might be locked in, but that doesn't mean things are going to be bad forever. There is still going to be joy. There is still going to be happiness. There is still going to be celebration. There are still going to be things to live for. There are still going to be things worth giving a damn about. And those things are worth fighting for. And so things are going to get worse, and things have the potential to get far, far worse. But now that you know, you have a duty to help other people know, because the more of us that get involved in this kind of fight, and that's part of why communicating truth is so important, the more of us that get involved in this fight, the more we are able to push back against authoritarianism. We're not going to talk about this at length during this stream, but a really great example of that is in South Korea right now. Basically, the president attempted to coup the government by mobilizing the military and declaring martial law, declaring all of his opponents were secret sympathizers with North Korea or North Korean operatives. And he deployed the military. Military and police started swarming the capital, preventing lawmakers from entering parliament. And you know what? You know what happened? Those lawmakers climbed over fences to get into the parliament and vote to end the military martial law. And they were supported by thousands, colossal crowds of South Koreans turning out to resist the power grab. And that resistance allowed the parliament to overrule the president, end martial law, and now there's going to be some kind of consequences come the morning in South Korea. But it is wild. Did all of this happen recently? This all happened today. But it's an excellent example of what it looks like. And, the initial protest was like, kind of drunk older guys, but pretty soon they were joined by young people of all stripes from across Korea, South Korea. And like, yeah, that is the kind of resistance we need in order to thwart authoritarian overreach. Okay? And that is possible only if we all work together, and the more of us know this truth, the better we are going to be able to resist. That is the power of truth.
Most of the truth is only present because people work hard to produce it or to find it. And people can only produce or find truth insofar as there are institutions and money behind them that help them do that, whether they're a health professional or a scientist, or in my opinion, the most important group, a local journalist, right?
True, local journalists are very important. And frankly, oh God, if I had so much more money, I would love to invest in like democratic worker co-op news outlets on the local level. That would be so good. That would be so fucking good. Maybe that'll be a project when I get old.
If you're going to believe in truth, you also have to believe in the labor of the people who are producing the facts. And what follows from that is that we have to rebuild local news. We have to be a country where people have an idea of what's going on in their own lives. This is directly connected to the big lie. Big lies flourish, they slide across zip codes and into minds because there's nothing stopping them. The thing that stops them, or at least creates some resistance, is confidence about your own life, your own town, your own locality. And that confidence that some things are true, some things are false, that confidence.
By the way, the South Korean resistance to the authoritarian overreach was only made possible by the fact that those soldiers did not want to just fire en masse into crowds of civilians, which is not the case in other countries. Other countries in different political circumstances have militaries that are absolutely willing to fire at random into a crowd. It only worked in South Korea because there's a reluctance to do that on the part of those military members who were at the protest. So, like, keep in mind that is what happened in South Korea is not always going to be a viable resistance strategy, but it is one example of how when you have mass support across a country for truth, for true narratives, for shared values that are based in the common good, that like you can resist in that way, which is great. And that isn't to say all the political situations in South Korea are good. They're absolutely not. But at the very least, the president wasn't able to seize control over the government.
That some reporters can be trusted, that only can arise with some kind of local press. So if we don't have local press, then people jump immediately to the national, they jump immediately to the emotional, they jump immediately to the conspiratorial. If we do have the local press, then we have some chance of building ourselves back towards a country which doesn't just believe in truth, but which has some truth to believe in. And this is where I want to close, though. So there are a couple of things there are a few things I've already said we have to do. We have to believe in truth because it's our only political defense. We have to remember that free speech is ultimately about telling truth to power. We have to reckon with leaders who lie to us all the time. We have to remember that a big lie is not just big in scale, but that it has a certain political force. It expands into a vacuum and it draws other things into it. We have to build back local news. But finally, we also have to be willing to just assert this value. We have to not just be willing to say things are true. We have to be willing to say, look, I believe that things are true. I believe that there is truth. We're in a 21st century environment where people are simultaneously, I'm borrowing now from Hannah Arendt in her book Origins of Totalitarianism, people are simultaneously gullible and cynical, right? People they're cynical about all the stuff they don't like, but they're gullible to the things that make them feel good, right? And that combination of being always cynical but
feels over reals, totally got you, Timothy Snyder,
always gullible, leads us towards authoritarianism. The only way to get through, to overcome the gullible and the cynical, is to be a skeptical hunter, right? To be skeptical, of course, of the world around you and the lies that people tell and the self-interested fictions that abound, to be skeptical of that, but to also be a hunter for truth, right?
Yeah, I mean, really the only way you can get through people who've chosen feels over reals is to ask them to question their fundamental assumptions. Like you cannot lead them to water and get them to drink, but you can ask them at the very least to question some of the bedrock values that they seem to espouse and how that is reflected in, government or political figures or what have you.
To seek and to find. And in that seeking and finding, you have I think there's no choice but to assert the virtue of truth, right? That facts are there, facts we work for, facts we have, but that we believe in truth, right? Not just a truth that's far away that we can't see, but everyday truths too, the little truths,
I mean, Travis T, to be completely honest, like that seems like a sad way to live. You gotta be able to honestly engage with other people in real life and online, and like it's scary to put yourself out there in an unvarnished way. I totally get that. But the people that you meet and the connections that you make in real life are going to benefit greatly from not trying to like put yourself in the position of like having to go meet with HR after every interaction you have. And if you find yourself saying things that would get you sent to HR constantly, you need to question why that is. 'Cause like that's not normal. that that's not okay.
The little facts. Then in a way, those are the things that are most important. So lesson number 10 was believe in truth. Thank you.
True. Believe in truth. True. All right, this is going to be the last one for today's stream because we do not have the time.
I'm Timothy Snyder. It's August.
Oh, look at him in a whole new location.
I misread the title of this stream.
I bet you did. And you know what? I bet a lot of people, I bet a lot of the same people who misread Gridlock also misread the title of stream as well.
August of 2021, and I'm making 20 short videos about the lessons of my little book on tyranny. I'm doing this for a couple reasons. The first is that it's been about 5 years since I composed the book. We've been through the Trump administration, and at the end of it, we're still facing some pretty fundamental problems. The second reason is that with the help of the wonderful Nora Krug, we've now created a graphic edition of On Tyranny, a much deeper and a much better book with updated text, but most importantly with illustrations, which I think make the book both more accessible and I think more profound. The video today is about lesson 11, investigate. I'm going to read the lesson and then make a few remarks about what I think we've seen.
Just real quick, because I totally get where you're coming from, Travis T and Screech. Like, I'm autistic as fuck, okay? It is draining for me to mask around people that I don't know very well. I totally get that. But the goal should be to find people you don't have to mask around. You know? That will enable you to have so much better relationships with folks. Or at the very least, people who understand, your position and the way you talk and stuff. All I'm saying is that, like, people who don't understand that, and people who don't understand, like, how you are when you drop your guard, like, they're not gonna be your pals, you know? They could be coworkers, it could be acquaintances, but they're not gonna be your main squeezes, you know?
In the last few years, and what I think we'll see in the next few. So, lesson 11, investigate. Figure things out for yourself. Spend more time with long articles. Subsidize investigative journalism by subscribing to print media. Realize that some of what is on the internet is there to harm you. Learn about sites that investigate propaganda campaigns, some of which come from abroad. Take responsibility for what you communicate with others. So we investigate, first of all, in order to become citizens. We can't cooperate with other citizens unless we have a basis on which to do so.
Very Knifey Duck, feel free to drop the ban hammer on that chatter.
And that basis on which we do so are the things that we're confident about knowing, the things that we've figured out for ourselves.
Ooh, beep,
Also,
even better.
In order to be a citizen in a democracy which is threatened, you have to be able to defend yourself. And truth is the last line of defense. If there isn't truth, then oligarchy always wins. If there aren't facts, then spectacle always wins. An individual is always going to lose out to an oligarch who can make a better spectacle. What you need to have is the value of truth and also facts which can gather other people to support you. Secondly, we have to investigate to become people, to become individuals, to become individual persons. Why do I say this? Propaganda is very predictable. What people want to hear is very predictable. What the internet brings to you is very predictable, and it makes you more predictable. What's unpredictable is the world of facts. What's unpredictable is the real world.
It's true. I mean, like, it sounds trite, but reality is stranger than fiction. You know, like, if something actually happened in the real world to a person, it has the potential to be far stranger and far less believable than what one might make up if they were making up fiction, you know?
What's unpredictable are the things you find out if you actually look. So as you investigate, you become a less predictable person.
Dude, Travis
a person
T, that's
who's
me
harder
to a
to
T,
manage, a person who's
but a
harder
lady.
to rule, more of an individual. Another thing I've been thinking about with respect to this lesson about investigating are all of the things that we would not have known had there not been investigative reporters these last few years. Had Mr. Trump had his wish,
And I do think that this applies not just to investigative reporters, but also to, like, you know, the mechanism for de-radicalization or for radicalization is inquiry. You know, like, if you want to de-radicalize a conservative, you need to make them question and have introspection. You know, if you want to radicalize a liberal, you have to make them question and have introspection. You know, and I think that introspection needs to be based upon truth and facts, and that needs to be found by journalists, people who are paid to inquire.
Had reporters been thought of as enemies of the people, had they all been banished from the face of the earth, he would have gotten away with pretty much everything. We wouldn't have been able to understand how Russia intervened in our elections. We wouldn't have been able to keep track of...
Okay, Iotanist, if you're still watching somehow, the reason you were banned is because, frankly, coming into a chat that is about On Tyranny, Timothy Snyder's work, and asking about philosophers and my opinion on the Jewess, Hannah Arendt. I don't know. Those are some pretty big red flags. Yeah. So there you have it.
Inequality in the country.
Yeah, frankly, if you come into my chat and start talking about Jewesses, I'm going to think that you're probably a Nazi. Just because I've never seen anyone use that term who isn't a Nazi, or frankly, I've just never seen anyone use that term who isn't a Nazi.
We wouldn't have known what happened during his coup attempt. Without reporters, all of that fabric of reality goes away. But I'd like to turn that point around. We got through these last 4 or 5 years basically hanging by a thread. We only have a very few journalists left. If we're going to want to have a future as a free country, we're going to need a lot more journalism.
Which is why you should support your local free press. Okay, guys? Oh, that is my alarm, but we are almost done with this video. Let's finish it up. Guys, this is why you need to support your local press. This is why you need to, like, even if it's just like a buck or $2 a month, that can mean the difference in aggregate, okay? Even if it's just $5 a month, that can mean the difference in aggregate. Even if you aren't going to read that paper, it's a public service. And Story the Bard, thank you for the incredibly generous 10 gifted tier 1 subs. I would play...
Chat BWA.
I do owe chat a Mariah Carey trombone. I do not have the time for it, but we'll do it next stream. And also, Story the Bard, thank you for the incredibly generous 10 gifted subs. And, yeah, just support your local journalists and consider dropping some subs and donos for your Riverboat Jack streamers, okay? Just your local Riverboat Jack streamer. Consider doing that. Wow, thank you, person off screen. Let's finish this video.
And especially journalism that comes from below. Journalism which is about the places where we actually live. Not just journalism that comes from the coast or the big cities, but journalism which is from the middle of the country. Journalism which exists in every American county. I think one of the worst things which has happened to us is that we've lost the people who do the investigation about the things which really matter to us day to day, whether the water's polluted, whether the school board is good, who the local politicians are coming from and to whom they're beholden. These basic issues, we can no longer follow them because we've lost local news. If this country is going to turn around, we're going to have to find a way to make sure that in every American county, there are people whose job it is to investigate. So this was Lesson 11. Thanks very much for being with me. I'm Timothy Snyder, signing off. Thanks.
Yeah, I do think that Timothy Snyder is correct here. Like, this entire series has been so good, and highly recommend it to folks. I'm going to, again, link the playlist here, copy link address. Sophie Bliss, thank you for answering my call for subs and donos. I really, really appreciate it. And you got Banana Brain subscribed. Let's go.